First of all, I'm Carlin Moulton, and I want to wish you all a very happy new year. This is the first time we get to see most of your familiar faces, and so I hope it is the first of many times we get together. I want to thank you all for coming out on this very frosty January day. It is our pleasure to host this event honoring the work of our dear friend, neighbor, Ian Carr-Harris, and on the occasion of the launch of his book. A few things I would like to say just before we get going. Ian is undoubtedly one of the most astute commentators and participants in the Toronto art scene over the last 50 years. And I have to say that this is a document, which I was up reading till midnight last night, Ian, that intersects with my own history to some extent. And so at the same time as there are many commentaries about many different things, I'm also learning things about people who I consider to be my friends. Nancy Johnson, Joanna Householder, and I'm wearing my Women's Cultural Building Collective button as we get an honorable mention in the text. And it was a group which changed my life, I have to say. And so there are many trajectory shifting moments that are documented in this book. But much more importantly, I think Ian is illustrating and explicating what else was going on at the time. And what I was compelled by was this idea of the retracing, the palimpsest, an idea which has been returned to often in art. And in fact, there's a sculpture over there by Dale Dunning of the same name, where you're taking different layers of text and taking them away and adding back to them and reinterpreting the text in a different way. And so it seemed to me that this book is at the same time a personal diary and yet an exceptional cultural archaeologist's record. And by reading it, language we begin to understand is an ear, not just a voice. It's how we're accessing the traces of the previously unconscious, our ideas perhaps not yet fully formed. And I would say that this is true of both visual and written languages, and how we arrive at perhaps what I meant to say was. And it is that process that Ian writes about. And he says that most of us succumb to a romantic fantasy, vainly hoping to become a part of history. And I would say, with this volume, you guarantee your place in it. Before I introduce our host for this event, I want to acknowledge an irony that today's speakers are too aware of, but equally too polite to mention. And that is the absurdity of hosting this event within a venue where we blatantly attempt to construct an economically viable and sustainable enterprise out of pursuits that are inherently at their core a rejection of the commercial exchange. We live within that tension as fortuitously it keeps the lights on. And so therefore, let me say, we do have a limited number of Ian's books available for sale here this afternoon, should you wish to acquire one at the conclusion of this event.
Well, I think I'm going to have to say I'm humbled. And if this afternoon had to close right now, I'd be quite happy. Not because of the statements about myself, but about these incredibly interesting remarks about how art practice functions, the context in which it does function, has functioned, and the delight in hearing two very honored colleagues talk about the same times and the same life that I experienced myself in a very specific place, Toronto in the 1970s through the 1990s and into the 2010s. So I'd have to say that I was glued to my chair listening to these remarks and how important they are for me to hear and to hear from two fellow artists whose work I have always admired and whose practices I always look forward to seeing. So I'm hoping that you can hear me. Can you hear me at the back? Okay, a bit louder. Maybe I'm hiding my microphone too hard. Is that better? A little bit higher. Okay. I'm well known for mumbling, so I'll try not to. What I really want to do here, though, is to focus on the book I'm not going to focus on my own career, and I'm delighted that Rob and Paulette have given you a sense of that, because that is important. But really, it's the book that I'm anxious to forward this evening. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the book. I want to talk about the process by which the book has come into place. It surprised me the other day to realize, when I dug up some old emails, that I originally got an invitation from Geoffrey Little at Concordia University Press, wondering if I would be interested in participating in a series of publications that they were embarking upon. And I was struck by the fact, and I hadn't realized this, but that email was in 2018, exactly 6 years, almost to the day, from where we are right now. So you may be interested to know that it can take 6 years for a book to come to fruition. It's not something that happens overnight. Those 6 years were occupied to a great extent by discussions around what should be in the book, examinations of whether in fact they were available in any useful fashion, discussions about what would come together as a book, instead of you might say passages that seemed beside the point. So one writes sometimes beside the point. So it was an incredible journey to work with Geoffrey Little and his successor, Ryan Van Hoeste, at Concordia University Press, to bring this to where we are now. And I'd just like to read this, because I think it meshes with what Rob and Paulette have mentioned. But this is from Geoffrey Little at the press. And within the email, there was a particular paragraph that I thought would be interesting to read. And he writes, writings by artists transmit a way of thinking about artistic practice that the writings of academics do not. Artists' texts bridge gaps between critical or curatorial writing and artistic practice, and they have the potential to generate new creative opportunities. As well, by bringing together materials previously published in ephemeral media, such as lectures, online, and print interviews, and small-run or limited distribution publications, formats that are often accessible only to geographically limited or specialized publics, a collection such as this would make your texts available to a wide audience. I believe such a project would appeal to a broad readership of Canadian and international art historians, practicing artists, curators, cultural studies scholars, and students. I was thrilled to hear that because, as Paulette especially has pointed out, things slip into history. And at a certain point, the point, for instance, that I'm at right now, you start to think, well, am I just history? Is that the end? Is this just a document that's going to sit on a shelf someplace and gather dust? And when Geoffrey Little says that he thinks that it's important for these various publications that existed ephemerally to come together and constitute a record, but a record that is there as a living document that others now, without that history, can read through and understand things that are in fact far from simply historic. They are in fact pan-historic. They exist for us even today. Perhaps the words are different, but in any case, the thoughts and the challenges remain the same. So that was one of the reasons why, when Geoffrey asked me to participate, I thought, well, yes, I think this would be a grand thing for the press to concentrate on. And in fact, it is a concentration. The Concordia University Press saw this series of books devoted to the writings by Canadian artists as one of their premier projects. And I wanted just to bring two in that series to mind here, so that you understand that I'm not alone in this, that the writings of Ken Lum and the writings of Liz McGore are equally in that same series. And it's so important to understand that we're all in it together, that this is an enterprise that all of us are participating in, and hoping and imagining that these writings have a life that goes far beyond the history that we have experienced ourselves. Anyway, I wanted to make that point. I'm going to also say that on the question of recognizing that one isn't alone in the world, and of course we've just heard my friends Rob and Paulette amplify that point. I want to just give my acknowledgments to, I've given my acknowledgement to Geoffrey Little and the press. Geoffrey Little was originally the director of the press, but he then was asked to become the chief librarian at Western Ontario, University of Western Ontario, which is where he is now. And his position was taken over by Ryan Van Houstie and Ceylan Tourdy. So I've worked over the last 4 years, let's say, with Ryan and Ceylan in Montreal to bring this thing through. Any case, so I want to acknowledge the incredible amount of work that they have taken on in producing this book. And it's always been a kind of back and forth, a sort of process of working things through and challenging this or challenging that. And of course, this is an academic publication, even though not by an academic. And academic publications have to go through peer review. So there is an incredible amount of specificity, incredible amount of fact-checking that goes into the process. You can't get away with sloppy publication. So Ryan and Ceylan did an amazing job at ensuring that all along the line, if the writing seemed, if it wasn't quite clear where the writing came from or who might have been involved in it, they made sure that I discovered who was involved in it and was able to make sure that information got forwarded. One of the big things that also, if you're ever going to go to press, is press of this nature at any rate, is getting or securing permissions. Permissions, I think, must have occupied at least 3/4 of my time over the last little while, because it's one thing to have an image, it's one thing to have a text, it's another to make sure that you have all the permissions from everybody involved, that they're okay with it going to press. So, and finally, when it came down to the writings especially the writings of the preface and the other writings that I contributed, the afterward, and to make sure that the transmission of the original texts was trouble-free, Yvonne was an amazing resource in making sure that everything that went down onto paper was unchallengeable. That was the thing, and nothing could be brought forward that would suggest that there was any slippage. Of course, finally, I really have to acknowledge Dan Adler, who wrote a terrific introduction, as Paulette mentioned, and indebted to Dan for the hard work that he put in and I think the incredible acuity of his perception in addressing what this book might actually have as value. So I think with those remarks, I hope you understand that a venture such as this is a complicated one that involves many people working hard hours and I have to acknowledge, therefore, also the people who ultimately gave me the permissions, because they too had to get to work and make sure that what they were telling me was going to be correct. So, it's a lot of people working very hard over a very long period of time to actually produce this, let alone, finally, the look of the book itself. The cover, they asked for input, which is why the cover includes what appears to be a blackboard, which I actually had to do and send to them so they could use it on the cover. But the cover was designed in-house by Concordia, and I want to say how pleased I am by what they did. It's not always the case that a publisher comes up with a good cover, but I was very happy with this one. So I'm here really just to open up the book, as it were, to give you a sense of it by reading from, in the case we have here this afternoon, 4 texts that I thought might be enjoyable, perhaps, for you to hear before you have the chance to read the book at some other time. So I'm just going to read from 4 texts that I selected from the publication, and I hope that they'll give you a sense of the kind of range, perhaps, of what's in it. So I think for that, I'm just going to start, and there's a couple of illustrations here that I'm going to have available because I'm reading a text, but of course behind the text there is a work. And because you may not have access to the book at the moment, I'm going to make sure that you see what it is I was seeing at the time. So I think we're pretty well there now. And in the same sense that Philip Monk once gave a great lecture at the Rivoli in Toronto back in the 70s, Philip, if any of you know Philip, he's very precise, Philip Monk. And I still remember Philip walking to the podium with a red rose in his lapel and sitting down, and before he started, he said, "This lecture will take exactly 1 hour and 15 minutes, and I won't take any questions until after that." So we all knew that it was going to take 1 hour and 15 minutes, and we could hold off on any questions we might have. But anyway, in that same spirit, I'm going to read these texts, and hopefully you'll enjoy them. And if you have questions at the end, of course, I'd love to hear from you. All right, so the texts are from, the first one I'm going to read is from 1989, and the second from 1997, the third from 2010, and the final is from my afterword in the book, which is 2023, I think. All right, so the first text is very short. It's the introduction to remarks that I gave at a symposium in 1989 called Made in Canada, Situating the Canadian Art Identity. And Yvonne was reminding me that back in the day, and perhaps even more alive perhaps now, Canadian identity was fraught, was a question for everybody. You couldn't really go to a lecture without somebody talking about the Canadian identity. So here we are in 2025, casting our minds back to 1989, when the Canadian identity didn't have to face being the 51st state, but at least it was alive and well as a problem. And so this is the small introduction I gave to that symposium. The rest of my remarks went on for about 25 pages, I think, so we'll just restrict ourselves to this. This is the brief to the symposium then. I wrote, "It is important to examine first just what are the main assumptions currently operative in Canadian culture, and consequently in Canadian art and criticism, and then to consider what direction implied by these assumptions would best serve our interests. We are North American. Despite serious misassumptions we hold, we are not like America or even Western Europe. We are not economically and politically powerful, nor have we, like the major powers, mythologized our identities into totalizing presumptions. This allows us a predisposition to appreciate historical context, individual construction, and political intervention as more than novelties on the one hand or national emergencies on the other. Our curiosity about our own identity is a manifestation of this general condition. The direction this should take us in, I believe, is towards a strengthening of our terms of inquiry, both within our national cultures and outside of them. Ultimately, Canada's identity and the identity significant to Canadian art and criticism should involve a sophisticated recognition of how identity works and what responsibilities it entails." And so from there, I went on to all the questions the symposium was asking us to deal with. My second selection from 1997 is from a review that I wrote on the Montreal artist Angela Grauerholz and her exhibition at the time, Fellow Traveler, that was at the Olga Koper Gallery in the fall of '97. Now, Angela had prefaced her exhibition with a quote, her own quote, her footnote, you might say, on the exhibition, and she wrote, "They are the images that we have from our memory of what the future used to look like." I'm standing looking at a cluster of travelers boarding an airplane. The plane is not large, and there cannot be more than a dozen figures assembled on the wet tarmac. And I'm just going to show you the image of the, this is from Canadian Art, the image of the work in question. It's been raining, though it has stopped now, and despite the brightness in the sky's horizon, everything near is dark, smudged in the gloom of a rain-soaked pause. Within this ambiguity, a white line painted luminously on the surface of the runway intersects with me at the center of my vision. My viewpoint seems picked out, as in a perspective study, and the scene before me, despite its indeterminacy, becomes an exercise in the appropriateness of things in the world. I'm standing in the Olga Koper Gallery, looking at Travelers by Angela Grauerholz, and the indeterminate nature of the photograph is oddly replicated here. The sun at the moment is from the west, and its light passes through the clear story onto the gallery walls and floor in ever-shifting intensities. A thin ray just touches one edge of the austere black frame, which gives this, and the other 9 works in Grauerholz's exhibition, a sense of mourning reminiscent of the black borders on commemorative stamps in my boyhood collection. I experience a sense of epiphany as I watch the sunlight's measurement of time deepen and intensify the image's own suspension of time. I think about Angela Grauerholz's remark about memory and future. There is a point of view central to all these works, and Travelers is emblematic in this respect. Each occupies language in a double register. Let's call the first a declension, because it's about naming or placing. As I occupy that view of the runway in the picture, it occurs to me I am privileged in several ways, by my apartness from the travelers, by the darkness which envelops me, by the centrality mapped by the white line, by the black frame itself. There is a reiteration of separation. I had been declined. In precisely which grammatical case, however, remains obscure, and within that obscurity I am displaced, named a flaneur, a nomad, ironically, a fellow traveler. Let's call the second register conjugation, because it's about acting or timing. I have to think, what is it I'm doing on that runway? How is it that I'm there? And what does it signify that I'm also here in the gallery, watching the sunlight activate a photograph, watching it move gradually towards night? What tense do I occupy? Past, present, future? Sometimes we need to listen to artists. When Angela Garholt speaks about her images as what the future used to look like, I realize I can be in several tenses at once. I can be in the future anterior. And now I know my tense. I'm back in the future. So that's from 1997. Now, I've chosen this one because it's about a problem in art that I find fascinating, which is why I've written this essay, I suppose. But it's also a text for a projected catalog, which unfortunately didn't occur, but it was in fact used in the exhibition. It was an exhibition called Yvonne Lemerick and Joan Key, incidentally, at the Nunnery Gallery in London, England, in April-May 2010. The work concentrate on the title of the exhibition, incidentally. I shifted the notion of incidental to include parenthesis. And in the review, or catalog essay, excuse me, I selected a particular quote from Bertrand Russell that I discovered in Wikipedia when I looked up parenthesis, just as I wanted to check my facts and just see what Wikipedia had to say about it. When I came across this little snippet of a quote from Russell, I thought it was quite perfect. But I should point out that the quote goes like this: "Mathematics, comma, rightly viewed, comma, possesses not only truth but supreme beauty." Now, what's interesting about the quote is that it inserts a command when rightly viewed, and that parenthetical remark breaks up the sense of the sentence and causes one to question. So it's that questioning that the parenthesis can produce, the sense of incidental that I wanted to concentrate on in the text. So the text. The pleasure of the parenthesis is its invitation to a digression. Perhaps we can even say that pleasure itself constitutes a digression, that it lies only within or dependent upon that obtuse level of self-interrogative meaning that Roland Barthes suggests is the realm of art, but which might also be the evocative realm of plenitude, amplitude, beatitude, solitude, similitude, for states, in other words, that suggest something beyond the reach of closure. At any rate, the parenthesis qualifies, interpolates, intervenes in the structure of linear meaning. It enlarges our relationship to something by interrupting our concentration from within. It destabilizes one truth by the simultaneous delivery of another. It is this simultaneity of the incidental, this interpolation, that operates centrally in Lemerick's work, and which is specifically located in the title of this exhibition at the Nunnery. This is, I'm not sure if you can see it properly, but this is the work that I was talking about. For Lemerick, these struggles with the image, as Canadian critic Philip Monk has put it, are part of the game. It is a game written into the grammar and syntax of language, in fact, into the dialectical relations existing between the mind that reflects and the body that engages. Sight, sight, line, the title of the work. For instance, a tall square column with mirrors at eye level on each side occupies the center point of a square gallery. Intermittently painted black lines, precisely spaced around the gallery's perimeter walls, connect as a single line in the four mirrors when perceived from set positions in the space. In effect, the painted lines and their reflected images combine to fold the envelope of the space into a coherence constructed for the viewer from the collapse of physical and virtual experience, creating a moment of uneasy simultaneity. Within that moment, we are, incidentally, neither the one nor the other. Finally, I just want to read a short piece. It's the postscript from the anthology. I wrote a long preface for it as well. I was asked to. But when I had, more or less when I was coming to the end of the selections and seeing what now lay within the bounds of this publication, I thought a little bit of a postscript, a bit of a thought about what I had just experienced. And you have to remember, for the first time, these writings between 75 and 2020, I hadn't read most of them for decades. So the publication, the book, represented very much a revisitation into worlds that I had long since moved beyond. So having gone through the process of reading through these and struggling with them, it occurred to me that I needed to really reflect on what I had experienced, and this was my reflection. And it's from 2023, January 2023, 2 years ago. I find that in the act of writing, there is a moment when the writing itself erases its subject, the work of art, though clearly that work remains as a trace. To use Heidegger's invention, it remains under erasure, quote unquote, present and necessary, but for that moment set aside or overwritten. In its place are the words, and it is now the authority of the words that determines the work. I write this with some trepidation, since undeniably it is the work of art that enables the writing. But there is no contradiction, or rather, there would only be a contradiction if both the work and the word were simultaneously to occupy the same space. It is the very absence of the one in the space of the other that enables their dialectical relationship to engage the viewer in a space that neither the work nor the words can themselves occupy. Hovering over the pages of the text, and Magritte-like over the work itself, is the inchoate shape of possibility that remains greater than either. What then is this text that rests on the page? What relationship does it hold for the absent work, this work that is now under erasure? It is not the work, it is not even a semblance of the work. It has become a working out in itself, an unconcealing, to use another Heideggerian term, that is not so much about the truth of its subject, but about the text as an opening up of what could be of value in the possibilities that the work is either intentionally or inadvertently called into existence. So that was my reflections on what it is to write about art. I guess finally I'll just say that hovering, Magritte-like, over this whole enterprise, and acknowledged, of course, by the press, is the fact that, like Liz, like Ken, I'm an artist. And I generally think of myself primarily through that lens. But there is no contradiction, as I suggested. There is a sense of simultaneity, that one can occupy two spaces at the same time, spaces that are quite different from one another, but nonetheless arc between them to produce something that neither the original work nor, of course, the writing itself can possibly be, only what it can offer to you as you read and think about the work that you presumably have seen or had contact with. So, as an artist, of course, I've certainly enjoyed looking back through these writings, which I wrote as an artist. I was writing very much in the vein of reflecting on the work of my peers, primarily, reflecting on the requests from the various publications that asked me to write in the first place, and, 'cause, 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 ' just enjoying, I guess, the moment of being both an artist and a writer in that sense of semi-contradiction. Anyway, that was generally the whole process that the book represents. I do think that along with Liz and Ken, it surely must offer, as Paulette and Rob were suggesting, offer something to move forward to bring forward as we move forward into whatever further contradictions we're going to be experiencing in the next few years. So, I'll also say that, coming to something that Rob said, that things were a bit different then, and I spent 25 years living in an illegal manufacturing building from the 19th century in downtown Toronto. And one of the joys of the contradiction of living in a space that was illegal was that the caretaker and I had an understanding that he left at night. I was there during the night as the night watchman, and nothing could possibly go wrong until the inspector showed up, of course. Anyway, they were amazing times. So, and I kind of, I don't know, of course I'm anticipating, but I think it's very different now, of course, for young artists, especially in a place like Toronto, Montreal even, for the major cities, for artists to find a perch, because increasingly those perches are being subsumed by the rapid population of these cities and the need for space for housing. So the times are changing, and I'm quite sure that younger artists are finding means of dealing with it. But when we look back, as Rob was, to how we were able to work in a major city like Toronto, it's certainly compelling to realize how privileged we were.